Hello,
Hello, good evening.
how is everybody?
Hello. Hi, Daphne.
Hi, Matt.
Is Jennifer joining us?
No, she doesn't normally get to do finance because New Albany's city council meets on the second Tuesday or the third Tuesday. So
Okay,
she listens to the audio at a later time.
all right.
Okay, it is 6:30, so we can get started. We have 7 identified items on the agenda today, and the first of which is the July financials. So I will turn it over to Treasurer Berlingo to talk us through it.
Okay, Jill, yeah, thank you for putting that up. If you can go to the second page. Okay, so nothing too unusual about July other than the collection of tax revenues for the month of July is significantly under last year. Collections started out slower and a little bit later. We do expect to receive the bulk of all tax revenue in the month of August. So that variance will basically be eliminated. That's due to timing. A couple of small tax abatement revenue sharing checks were received during the month. Items to note, tuition being negative. The prior year in July was also insignificant, except that, due to the online learning environment, we will see reduced amounts of tuition revenues for the year. When you look at dues and fees, the same thing is also evident. Only $580 collected in the month of July versus an estimate of $12,000 in the prior year being $12,500. So again, if we're not going to be collecting certain fees due to the online versus in-school model, we will also see a negative impact of that. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later when we discuss the athletics. Where we continue to collect rentals for Cell Tower and Clark Hall. And interest earnings remain strong, given that we do have certain investments that go out for the next 2 to 3 years that were locked in at higher rates in the last 12 to 24 months. They will be declining over time because as things mature, I'm reinvesting at much lower interest rates in the 30 to 40 basis point range for something that goes out 2 years. Commercial paper typically is also in about the 30 to 35 basis point range for 9 months. We're somewhat limited on commercial paper where we're starting to bump up against limits so that the names of companies like Toyota, which is a very popular one and very safe investment, where we're starting to hit limits in terms of how much we can invest in any one particular company. So that being said, we do still anticipate, decent interest earnings over the year. It'll be down from the prior year, but not as significant as I think potentially we forecasted. So there might be a little bit of upside in interest income. The state foundation received $1,158,000. That is somewhat in line with what we were projecting. That reflects the 10% decrease from the previous level of foundation payments. The state overall is not doing, I think, as poorly as originally forecasted. July revenues were higher than anticipated, although I think a big part of that at the state level was because the timing of people filing tax returns. they were typically due in April, and then they came in, 3 months later. So another thing to note, we had advances in of 536,000. That is the return of money that we advanced at the end of the year to cover deficits in certain grants. So that money came back into the general fund. On the expense side, effectively on estimates for expenditures. So nothing to note. One thing though is that the purchase services and supply numbers do include some, and the capital do include purchases related to COVID. The COVID spending will be reclassed against the money that we've received from the state and the federal government, so that the actual expenditures for July will be not adjusted downwards because they're in the books, but there will be a benefit to the reclass in the month of August and September. So a positive month in terms of surplus of 2.2 million. I've also changed the format of the chart a little bit. There's a monthly revenue and actual and estimate and variance column. Compare that to prior year to date. And I also included the fiscal year 2021 forecast amounts. So as opposed to on the previous charts that I think you were accustomed to before I developed this, it was a percentage of appropriations or revenue estimates. I've now put in forecast amounts. The appropriations will be set next month because they're required to be established before October 1st. So at the September meeting, you'll be approving permanent appropriations for fiscal year 2021. Any questions on summary of the income statement? Okay. The next chart is again just the historic kind of look back as to the trends on receipts and expenditures broken out by local and state sources. It's only 1 month of activity, so the percentages are a little bit skewed. But on an operating basis, we were positive 1.7 million for the month, ending cash balance of 14.3 in the general fund. The next chart is a summary of cash. So 44.5 million of total cash on hand. That's broken out 23.8 million in the construction fund. We do expect to expend most all of that this fiscal year, with some falling into July and August of 2021, which is fiscal year 2022, as we wrap up construction of the elementary building. Most of the funds of available cash are in right now the Heartland money market account. We had negotiated a fixed rate on that for 3 months. That rate will be declining effective this month in August, where it's going to drop to 40 basis points and lock that in for 3 months. So we typically negotiate a premium over the STAR rate to keep the funds locally. STAR is at 38 basis points at the end of the month. I believe it's down to 32 or 33 basis points today. STAR will continue to drop because the bulk of their holdings are in commercial paper, which is short-term in nature, and those rates continue to drop.
So you have negotiated with Heartland to always have a premium over the STAR Ohio rate?
Yes. So 6 months ago, I locked in the initial rate, which was, I believe, 1.7% or something in that range. After 3 months, it dropped. And now again, it's dropping again, but we compare it to the Star Ohio rate and kind of lock it in so that we're at least covered for a 3-month period. I think the risk of any upside in interest rates in the near term is practically zero.
Yeah, I would agree.
So kind of locking that in. It doesn't necessarily prohibit me from pulling the money out of there and moving it back to Star, but it does give us some additional earnings and it keeps the money locally.
I like it.
Any questions on investments or?
Is the Red Tree construction funds going to stay at 0.65, or do you anticipate that going down as well?
That will also drop as things mature. Also, I'll be continuously pulling funds out of there as we spend them. So the money will be pulled out and moved over to the Heartland money market as we expand, to pay the bills.
Is it a laddered rate based on dollars invested?
Yes, they have a portfolio of commercial paper, government bonds, and CDs.
Okay.
That are mostly all short-term in nature.
All right. Thank you.
The next item on the agenda was the transfer to the severance fund. This is something we've been doing each year. And that represents a $275,000 transfer from the general fund to the severance. And that's to cover payments for retirees, for payout of accrued vacation or sick leave, or those type of things that are contractual in nature when employees retire.
Mike, I'm not sure if I'm on the right page.
Yeah, no, you can leave it there. There's not a page for this.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Okay. Last year, there were a higher number of retirees than what was anticipated, but there were adequate funds. We were a little bit short at the end of the year and had to transfer a small amount to cover the deficit, but the estimate is about 8 retirees per year. Unless COVID has an impact on that and we see a higher number of retirees, the 275,000 should be accurate or adequate. That transfer will take place in the month of August. The next is the then and now. We'll be establishing a new fund for the coronavirus relief fund. That was the $392,000 that we are receiving from the state, from the federal government. And we will be expending those funds rather quickly. So I believe that we've just about accumulated enough to offset the balance in that fund with what is in process. And we'll go over that in more detail later. The then and nows are for transactions where services were rendered where a purchase order was not in place prior to the service. So the first relates to the athletic fund. And this was something which I guess historically they just did not create the purchase order prior to the rental taking place. I'm not sure why. Kind of communicated that we need to do that. So in order to approve the expenditure, and this service did take place last year, I would need board approval. As you know, anything over $3,000 requires board approval. If the sequence of requisition, purchase order, service, payment is not followed, so that that's one of the items that needs approval. The second is the purchase order we did have in place for Walter Haverfield was insufficient to cover the amount of the billing. So there are blanket POs that are set up for certain services throughout the year. This one just was short, and I think the majority of these billings relate to negotiations and other personnel-related matters.
Hey, Mike, I just wanted a question. As far as the swim season, what is that period as far as for their season? And I don't know as far as like footballs in the fall and baseball.
I'm sorry, I can't. I need to turn up my volume here.
No,
It's in the winter, Brian.
okay.
Yeah, it's during winter sports season. So basketball and, hockey and all the other winter sports.
Okay.
Okay, so those two items or three items will actually be on the agenda to approve on Thursday evening. Obviously, something we don't want to see a lot of. And I tend to not act favorably or, basically contact the people involved and kind of explain to them that they cannot be purchasing services without a valid purchase order.
I think they had a change in management at the Y over the last year, which is probably why this didn't get billed. But I don't believe we're using the Y this year. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I'm not sure we're going to be able to use their pool this year. There were some issues with it. And I think we're still in talks about it, but yeah, we may not be able to use it this year.
So it may not be an issue next year, Mike, I guess
Right.
is what I'm saying.
Okay. And I've spoken to athletics about it, and they understand the need to make sure we have the purchase order in place. Okay, the next two items kind of go together with this chart. So extracurricular stipends and the pay to participate fees. If you look at our last 2 years of revenues, in FY19, gate receipts were $200,000. Fundraisers and sales are kind of minimal. Entry fees, $21,000, cheerleading donations. So a total of about $250,000 plus about $79,000 in pay to participate fees. And this is for students who play sports, and they help contribute towards the cost of that. So $329,000. If you look at FY20, that dropped to $285,000. Gate receipts were slightly lower. Pay to participate fees were less, and part of that had to do with refunding fees at the end of the year, because some of the sports, we were out of school beginning in March timeframe. So some of the activities did not take place, and we ended up refunding some fees. The current environment being virtual right now, we know that football and soccer have been placed on hold. They are still practicing, and they are still scrimmaging, I understand. So the coaches, in terms of the extracurricular stipends, and the activities around that are still occurring. Therefore, we don't have an issue in terms of payment, for those services. But as far as the pay to participate fees, we need to evaluate how much of the fee potentially should be assessed, especially if the sport does not have interscholastic events. So that's something yet to be determined. But I believe that for sports that are proceeding, tennis, golf, girls volleyball, those sports, we should be assessing fees. In any event, we are going to see a decrease in fee revenue. We are going to see a significant decrease in gate receipts. Football is by far the biggest contributor to that. followed by basketball, which is a winter sport. And then we do receive some amount of revenue from soccer. It's very unlikely that we're going to see a high amount of revenue in the athletic department, which is going to put a significant strain on their budget. Currently, they are down to a relatively small balance in the high school and middle school funds. They do have access to about 104,000 in advertising revenue. That's in a separate fund that's typically been held for capital improvements, but it could be used for just general type expenditures this year, if need be. And there's also a 32,000 in the tournament fund, which is usually reserved for, this is where we make money in hosting tournaments. But then it's typically used when we send our students to state tournaments or other activities. So it's usually reserved for that. Again, depending upon what the year shapes up to be, maybe a part of that could also be used. But I did definitely need to had a meeting with athletics recently just to kind of review the spending. And there's a realization that we are going to have some significant strain on the budget. Any questions related to that?
Hey, Mike, I do have a question. With the, obviously with less interscholastic competitions in the upcoming school year, we're going to have less bus driver or bus routes and things of that nature, those being paid out. How much of an offset are we looking at, or could we kind of expect with those reduced costs versus the reduced income?
I don't have that number handy in terms of the transportation cost, but I can certainly get that because I know it's accounted for separately. So I can get back to you on that in terms of what the impact is. I can try to forecast out what that would be in conjunction with the athletic department.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's not going to be huge, I know that, but it will be kind of be good to know in case it does come up on social media or something else.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good thought. I would also add that we should see, a reduction in substitute costs as well, not necessarily associated to teachers, sick leave, but related to professional development. We had already kind of decreased our professional development offerings. And then given the current situation we're in, we're pulling back even more so. So we should see some reductions there as well.
Okay, the next item was pandemic related expenditures. We will get into more detail next month. Right now, there's not a chart on this, Jill, sorry. But right now, I believe we've expended 300,000 to 400,000 in things like plexiglass, masks, sanitizer, cleaner, those type of items. We've also purchased software for remote learning. And much of that it'll all be applied against the funds that we've received. So at this point, like I said, I'll provide more detail in terms of what all the actual spending is next month. So I think we'll have a better handle and better picture of how much those costs are going to be. Anything that someone would like to see related to those expenditures? If you do feel you'd like to see any specific analysis, just email me or call me and I can certainly put something together. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about food service. If we look back over the last fiscal year 17, 18, and 19, food service was operating at a net profit almost break even in 17. If you scroll down a little bit, Jill. Okay, so in 17, it was a 22,000 loss, 175,000 profit, and then 193, and we had built the balance up to $567,000 in the fund. For FY20, we were on track to again make money for the year, except when operations ceased in March, effectively shut down the revenue stream, but we continued with the cost. So for the year, we ended up with a loss of $223,000, which reduced our fund balance to 344 at the beginning of the year. Based upon a forecast that I did with Linda Green, our food service director, we made a few assumptions relative to the model that we're in. So we're virtual for the first 3 months. We were thinking that maybe November, December, we would be in the hybrid model. And then the best case, we would be back in school full session in January. We don't know if that's going to happen or not, but we just tried to make some assumptions as to what the revenues would be and the expenditures based upon the different models that we might have. So we will still get some federal government reimbursements due to the free and reduced lunches, even where we are just providing lunches to kids where they come up and pick up lunches. But that's down significantly from what it normally would be. The breakfast and lunch estimate, again, if we came back full time, we can recapture most of the revenues, but we'd still be projecting a loss of about 119,000 for the year, I think, under the best case scenario. That number can quickly turn more negative if we don't come back full time to where we would be bringing in more revenue to food service. And if I look at the monthly impact, even under the hybrid model, we are not profitable, because in order to implement that, we would need to bring back most all staff in order to prepare food. And we'd only have sales of about 50% because only half the kids are in the building on a weekly basis. So we're still incurring losses. And then the profits that we'd be projected under the full model, where everyone coming back, would turn back to a loss. So we're looking at about a $90,000 a month, $90,000 to $95,000 swing for every month we delay from the hybrid to back in school full time. If that were to occur, we'd have about 2 to 3 months. Potentially, we can go through March before we deplete the fund balance. Probably only February, in which case then we'd be looking at subsidizing food service from the general fund.
Mike, where did the 922,606 revenue, how is that derived?
Okay, that would be based on so if we look at the first 3 months or so under the virtual model, or 4 months, July through October, there's effectively almost no revenue, except for some government reimbursements. Starting in November and December, if we move to the hybrid model, we're bringing in about 80,000 and 75,000 for November and December. And then we assume, based upon going 5 days a week, where we're back in school full time in January, we're looking at about 150,000 a month of revenue.
Okay.
So what happens is, if we don't come back full time, then those revenues decrease significantly and the losses increase.
But they increase, but wouldn't the wages then be adjusted?
Well, the anomaly is that under the hybrid model, the assumption is that we need a full staff in order to provide
Oh,
the hybrid level of service. I believe we possibly could cut back on a few staff in that model, but discussions with Linda indicated that, we would need full staff in order to implement. So I went with the higher cost in the estimate.
okay.
So just as a kind of not a warning, but at least a heads up that, this would be a negative impact to the forecast because there was no assumption that we would be subsidizing food service. Obviously, we need to provide food service at least to the free and reduced population.
Have we heard any discussions at the state or federal level about additional USDA dollars for school lunches?
I have not. I could check with Ms. Green.
I haven't either, but it clearly is, I mean, I just can't even imagine being other districts that have an even higher percentage of free and reduced lunch, right?
Yeah, there are some districts that are 70, 80, 90%.
Yeah. That's crazy. Maybe we all need to send an email to our legislators and share this situation, right?
Any questions on food service? Any other questions, I should say?
Rather sobering.
It's difficult times. So that's all I had on the agenda this evening. If you want to discuss any other items or issues, I think we should have maybe another category on the agenda in case topics arise.
I think you shared that you're getting training tomorrow, your team, on the new EVAS system.
Yeah, that will be tomorrow morning. We are getting trained on EVAS to implement that. We are also getting a demo and effectively trained on EPAS, although I'm not sold yet on getting that until I understand it, with the demo and also making sure there's no negative impact to processing time.
Mm-hmm.
I've been assured that that no longer exists, that issue that they had months ago no longer exists. So,
Oh, gotcha. Does anybody else have questions with regard to any agenda items or other items? No? I can't see Burl. Let me scroll over here. Nothing? Okay. I just didn't want to miss you. All right, Brian, anything from you? No? Thank you. I know you talked the whole time, Mike, and I appreciate getting the information on all these items. It's really difficult to manage during these troubling times, and I know you guys are in there doing it every day, so thank you. It's not fun. Not fun.
definitely challenging.
A little challenging. Yeah. Jill and Steve are nodding, right?
Yeah, they have very difficult jobs today.
They really do.
I mean, with the things that come up and all of the meetings and issues and concerns with implementing this model, yeah, they've been doing a great job.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, if there's no further business, we will adjourn our meeting at 7:04.
Thank you. Good job, Mike.
Okay,
Thank
thanks.
See ya.
Night,
Thank
everyone.
you, Mike.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Bye.
Bye.